Good morning and welcome to Community Conversations. We always talk about topical issues on this show, and today's truly a conversation that's being had in families on street corners and various media, and that's the opioid epidemic. So to discuss what's happening in our communities, Worcester County's Chief Law Enforcement Officer is my guest today, and it's Worcester County District Attorney Joe Early. Thank you, Joe, for being here. Appreciate it.
Hi, Vicki. Thanks for having me today.
I appreciate it because there's a lot to be said and a lot your office does about this that people don't know, and I certainly, I'm assuming they don't know. I didn't know. So I just want folks to know that you work with law enforcement in 60 communities. So Worcester and 59 other towns and cities have more than 80 prosecutors in your office. You oversee operations at 11 district courts, superior courts, juvenile courts, grand jury, and the appeals division. So I don't know if I've left anything out, but you're a busy guy with a busy team, so thank you. So I've heard from several guests I've had in here and my contacts in the community about your opioid awareness task force. So we're going to talk in depth about that, but I realize how much your office is responsible for, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up something topical that's been going on, particularly in the last couple of weeks. And that's the shootings that have been taking place, the mass shootings. Columbine was one thing. With things that have been going on recently, it's increasing, especially this month. And I realize it hasn't happened in Worcester, so we're knocking on wood.
Yes.
But you're now in your fourth term as district attorney, so it's about 13 years, a long time. What's your position on the issue of gun control relative to stopping these mass shootings?
Well, I believe we have. I mean, when you go down the list, you got Columbine, you got Aurora, Colorado, you got your senior Joe, you got Killeen, you got Newtown, Sandy Hook, which not only led to deaths, but it also led to parents committing suicide that were suffering from anxiety, depression afterwards. You have the California synagogue shooting, the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, the New Zealand mosque shooting, the Virginia Beach shootings, and the recent shootings in Dayton and
El Paso.
El Paso, yeah. I think I heard Ed Davis on the phone the other day, former commissioner for the Boston Police Department. He made a real good point. We got some great gun laws in Massachusetts, tough gun laws. And if we had those type of gun laws throughout the country, he thought, and I agree with him, we'd be better off. You've got almost 90% of the people in the United States suggesting and supporting mental health background checks. I respect everyone's Second Amendment right to own a firearm, but I think, I did mental health law for 17 years, I don't see a downside to making sure that if people are mentally ill, they that there are safeguards in place so that a person who's floridly psychotic or schizophrenic can't possess a weapon or a firearm. I think that's one step that we have to take. We do a gun buyback program every year with Dr. Hirsch up at the UMass Medical School to get unwanted guns out of the home, because we do know that it isn't going to be the gangbangers that are turning their guns in. It's going to be an elderly woman who might have just lost her husband or a recent death, and they'll not know what to do with the gun. They're not really interested in selling it, but just getting it out of the house and making sure the grandkids can't get it. And we do know that most of these firearms that are stolen in breaking and enterings, do end up on the street, and they cause a lot of our deaths and a lot of our harm.
And I think when you talk about Massachusetts, there's always going to be a black market, right? I mean, there's always going to be. So you can only do so much. But so the issue is, and federally, the president's come. We're not going to go into political views, but he has stated that, and the Congress is looking at stronger background checks. But we already do that in Massachusetts, which is like, as you say, is a good thing. Do you think the internet has been? I mean, it can be a good thing and a positive thing. It can also be negative. Do you think that's one reason why we might be seeing an increase, or do you believe it's an access to guns issue?
I think whether it be guns, whether it be sexual exploitation of children, I think the internet fuels a lot of things. For example, with the sexual exploitation of children, I think that people working on urges and impulse control will take it a step further, because they used to have to, for example, go into a drugstore or go wherever to get a magazine. Now you've got instant gratification, which we know leads to people taking more chances, that type of thing. I think the internet, like you said, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
Okay, so back to the hard work going on in your very busy office. I think your
And,
mission,
and on that, don't get me wrong. You couldn't buy child pornography before
yeah.
in a store or Tony's News or something like that. But you could things that you wanted to say, or responsible adults, if they were buying, they could go into a
Right. It makes the information more available to a wider audience.
immediately available. Yep.
Yes, immediately and more
In
available.
these chat rooms with kids, people who have level 3 offenders, will frequently run a wire or something like that, get up online, and we'll see these people, within 20 seconds we'll have a hit. Someone looking to talk more about a child who's actually a police officer pretending to be a child.
Is that done out of your office?
We've done it. We've done it with our federal partners, state partners. Yes.
Yeah, it's so important. All right. So I think your mission statement for your office is interesting because it stresses two things. And I think people know the part about seeking justice through tough and fair prosecution. People think district attorney, they see you and your colleagues at these press conferences when there's a murder or, it's always, as you said before the show started, it's so tough to talk to people who have experienced such tragic loss. And you see it all the time because you're out there in the forefront of these murders and unresolved cases. But preventing crime with community-based outreach programs is part of your mission. And I think that's something that we don't often hear as much about. And so when we talk about the opioid epidemic, I wanted to talk about your task force. Recent data from the Department of Public Health, so people understand, was quoted in an article in the Worcester Telegram, I know you know this, shows that opioid-related overdose deaths, so not just opioid instances, but deaths continue to drop in many communities across Massachusetts. But in Worcester and a couple of other major cities, we've seen an increase in opioid-related overdose deaths. The Telegram's article quotes the Department of Public Health as saying about 21% increase in Worcester just in the 1 year, 2017 to 2018. Statewide, though, the number was dropping a very little bit, but it was dropping about 4%. So what do you think is the case in this district? Why do you think this is the case in this district that we're seeing this increase while everyone else is seeing a drop?
There's a couple things. One of them is the increased use of fentanyl that's going out on the streets, either as pills made to look like OxyContin or, being injected into the heroin that we're seeing right now. It's 80 times stronger than heroin. And what we're finding is it's lethal. I mean, Narcan is medication, as you know, Vicki, that will when someone uses heroin or fentanyl or any part of the morphine molecule family, it slows the nervous system, it slows down their breathing. What happens with the use of Narcan is it blocks the receptor, the opioids bounce off. But with fentanyl being 80 times stronger, we're seeing police, and whoever thought 20 years ago police would have to be saving lives
with Narcan.
With Narcan, injecting a nasal spray into the noses of those whose breathing is just about stopped. But they're doing it. And Chief Sergeant and Eddie Augustus,
Worcester Police Chief.
Yeah, Maddie Castile. They're helping to get more. AIDS Project Worcester's doing a great job getting more Narcan on the streets. So without that work, it'd be even higher. But I think what we've got to do is address it at a prevention level in the middle schools and get to the kids, which is something we're doing right now. When we were down in Atlanta, the Prescription Drug Abuse and Heroin Summit, we found that one of the things that we're using right now is a evidence-based program called This Is Not About Drugs. And we take that into the middle schools. And what we do is have the kids take a test about opioids, see a video with kids who have gotten hooked on opioids, then take the test again. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time. But after that experience, they're able to make informed, responsible choices and decisions about these drugs. And that prevention end of it's going to be great. I started opioid task force. We're over 500 members strong right now.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things I saw when I was down in Atlanta is that there were a lot of working groups. And the purpose of the working groups, it's severalfold: to break down silos, get the people to work together. Well, if you're, for example, over in public health having something that's successful, all right, share that with the sheriff's office, share that with the DA's office. Then the DA's office, we're in the schools, here's what we're doing in the schools. Can we partner with you? The sheriff's office, you got a person coming in that might have a prescription for Suboxone. Can we keep them on that Suboxone?
And Suboxone is?
Suboxone is a medically assisted treatment. And Dr. Nora Volkoff told us from the National Institutes of Health, specializing in addiction, there's a 70% mortality rate for people who aren't treated with medically assisted treatment.
People that are addicted.
Right.
And let's say Suboxone's often used in for what? Heroin addiction and opioid addiction?
Methadone, Suboxone, or Vivitrol. We reduce the risk of mortality by 70%. Now, people have to understand that this is not a moral failing, that this is not a character flaw, that opioid addiction is a disease. And that's not coming from me. That's coming from the smartest people in this country. Our former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy told us we've got to reduce stigma. People can't be thinking that, sure, that first pill started with a choice, but it may have started with a prescription. But right now, these people that are suffering, these families that are suffering, we don't need to make them suffer more by stigmatizing this as a poor choice, a bad decision. It's a very complex disease, Dr. Murthy told us, that requires a very complex solution. Sam Canones, who we had in the author of Dreamland, which is a great book, and I recommend to any of your listeners.
Dreamland, it's called?
Dreamland by Sam Canones talks about Purdue Pharmaceutical. They made $36 to $38 million in sales of OxyContin, peddling it as a non-addictive drug for pain. Yet they knew the whole time that it was addictive. They had done their own studies, and they ended up making $14 billion with a B in profit. So we bring in authors like Sam Canones. We work with the community. We work with private industry, faith-based groups. Jimmy Murray over at the Chamber of Commerce, Eddie Augustus, Dr. Castile, Chief
City
Sergeant.
Manager, DPA, head of Health and Human Services.
Congress McGovern helped, Senators Warren and Markey helped us get a $500,000 Hal Rogers grant, to fight opioid abuse, substance use disorder for 2 years. And some of those programs I've continued to fund out of our drug forfeiture fund. We have pilot programs in...
Now, can you explain, wait for a minute, sorry
Sure.
to interrupt, a drug forfeiture fund, what that is?
Sure. When we make an arrest, when our police make an arrest, they'll confiscate money from drug traffickers, and sometimes it's a lot of money. And the police department gets 50% of that money, and 50% goes to the DA's office to fight crime. Fighting crime includes prevention. Dr. Peel's, Robert Peel's rules of policing back in the 1800s, number one crime prevention tool that he suggested was prevention. So what we'll do is take that money, and we'll use it in several ways. We know the Department of Justice told us, we have a 19-page paper on our website that talks about it. It was to da.com, about how we can fight crime by keeping kids busy between the hours of 3 to 6 after school around responsible adults. So I'll take that 50% of the drug forfeiture money that we get, and I'll put it in. I've put over $1.5 million back into the community with boys clubs, girls clubs, YMCAs, YWCA, the Audubon Society, dance teams, arts, whatever's going to keep kids busy around responsible adults and out of the home, out of the medicine cabinet, which is another thing. Parents have to lock up their meds, dispose of them when they're not done. Make sure grandparents, too, who sometimes suffer from a little bit more pain, do as well. But our opioid task force brings together all of the members of the community, because really it's a community problem that requires a community solution. Now we're advancing that. I've got a working group coming together. We're going to go down to Plymouth County. They have a unique relationship there between the district attorney, the sheriff, and the police down there. Find out why their numbers went down 26%.
Their opioid-related overdose
Yes.
deaths number went down a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, and find out what can we bring back here to make it work. There are a lot of people committed to this, but the biggest thing is the experts in Atlanta told us is break down the silos. You've got to work together as a community. If you don't care who gets the credit, you can get anything done.
And you know who else said that? Senator Harry Chandler said exactly the same thing when we were talking about a specific bill. She said, I don't care whose name is on it.
Right.
And I don't care who gets the credit. I don't want the credit as long as the bill gets passed.
I don't want the credit either. There's plenty of credit to go around if the numbers go down.
Everybody has to work together, right? So everybody gets the credit.
There's an old joke I heard. There's no I in team, but there are two in idiot.
I haven't heard the second part of that. That's a good one. That's a good one.
But Senator Chandler has been right at the forefront, and I know one of you guys, Jimmy O'Day, and
Representative Jim O'Day, who we had here, talk about his own surviving
It's his
case.
own battle, right. And Senator Chandler's been great. She goes, you tell me what you need. You tell me what we need to do. So she's part of this working group we've put together. It's her, Representative O'Day, Lieutenant Governor Polito, Department of Public Safety, Tom Turco, Dr. Babu over at UMass. We've got head of the opioid awareness over at St. V's, Dr. Castile. It's about 12, 13 people. Chief Sergeant and Deputy Chief Ed McGinn. But what we're going to do is look and see what's working. See where we can get medically assisted treatment. See where, not just in Worcester, but throughout the county, because it doesn't stop at the county line or the city line. What's working in terms of knocking on doors the next day after an overdose. See what the hospital will share with us for people who don't get picked up by the police or the fire. Fire Chief Lavoie's on this as well. And medically assisted treatment, that, removing stigma and prevention. When we put these three things together, four things, these are the things that I think are truly going to work.
Now, the opioid task force, the bigger overall task force,
Yeah.
How often do you meet? And you said you bring in, I think you were telling me before, you bring in these guest speakers to talk about it. Does that involve teachers or, is it a wide range of people on the task force?
Yeah, very wide range. We've got people from law enforcement, people from the medical community. We've got people from private industry, public industry. We've got really people from the recovery community, people from Learn to Cope, people from just about every walk of life. And we've got another meeting coming up in September where we've got a young author from Worcester County who wrote a book that talked about his mother's battles with addiction and how he had to get raised by his grandparents. And if you go to our website, we'll have more information about it. It's Jared Krasaska. Yeah. And he's going to come in and talk. Well, we try and keep it interesting. And it's they're short meetings. We try and keep them within an hour. And one of the things we did was bring Sam Canones in here, the author of Dreamland, who came in. We had Dr. Ruth Potee. We did a Train the Trainer. Because believe it or not, prior to UMass instituting their program this year, and our meetings are quarterly, a lot of doctors, a lot of dentists, and a lot of nurse practitioners hadn't been educated in the proper prescription of these medicines. But now UMass, it wasn't part of the medical school curriculum. UMass, I'm very happy to say, and I applaud them for it, has made this part of the core curriculum at UMass Medical School.
That floors me.
Doesn't it?
A lot of that is taken, unfortunately, what often happens is it takes terrible things to happen before people mobilize. And so I think that's why the key word of prevention that you choose is interesting, because people, like I said, think of the district attorney as a prosecutor. And then after the crime's been committed, you come in and you prosecute. But no, you do a ton more on the preventative side. You do things with child advocacy, which is a whole nother show. But a lot of things come out of your office that I think people, maybe in the media, they see you on the news because somebody was killed and there's a murder or there's an unresolved case or something like that. And they don't realize that the district attorney's office is responsible for all this work and doing all this work on prevention. So you talked about Suboxone and medically assisted.
But one thing on that, Vicki, and I apologize for interrupting
no.
you, but working with our community partners, we've reduced juvenile delinquency complaints in Worcester County by 58%. You want to see the numbers. People say, well, how do you get the numbers go down in the jail? You attack when children, their brains are forming and developing, and when you can change and modify behaviors. That's why we're in the schools with This Is Not About Drugs. That's why we have programs, work with Carol Erskine at the juvenile court on fire starting, on shoplifting, on domestic abuse, on drugs and alcohol. That's why this is so important. And I don't like to take any credit for what I do. I got into this business because of my dad, and he didn't like taking credit.
And your dad was a congressman.
Yeah, and he was responsible for an extra responsible for an extra $500 million a year to the National Institutes of Health on prevention. He'd say to me, Joey, we spend 95 cents of every medical dollar on treatment. We've got is 5 cents on prevention. You've got to spend it on treatment, but you got to do more on prevention. I apologize for interrupting you there, but that's what I'm proud of. I got the numbers out last year when I had an election, but normally you can't worry about who gets the credit. You can't worry about credit. You do the right thing, and you can never go wrong. And my dad used to always tell me that.
Yeah. I was just thinking about your dad when I was first in my news career in Worcester, and very beloved congressman here. So yes, prevention is the case. So let's talk about. Sometimes people think that methadone and Suboxone is just a replacement. There's been a lot of Representative O'Day and I talked about this, because he's been fighting, and when he got an extension of the CARE Act, which I'll talk about in a minute, that was passed by the Baker-Polito administration. and he got an extension on that for a pilot program in jails, because trying to help people, because if they get out and reoffend, what good is that, right?
Right.
And we are tax dollars paying for these prisoners in jail, so not only does it help the person, but it also helps the average taxpayer. So, it's a smart use of dollars. And unfortunately, we're not doing it in a pilot in the Worcester County Jail at the moment, but they're doing it in jails so that they can do this. But there is still a lot, I think, of a little bit of stigma around even methadone.
Yes, there's
And
a
I
lot
know
of stigma.
doctors that, don't want to say that they, participate in the Suboxone program because they think it's substituting one drug for another.
I've heard that argument. And I've also heard people like Dr. Ruth Potee, who was like the Babe Ruth of medically assisted treatment, the Babe Ruth of fighting opioids. Tell us,
At
look.
UMass.
Right. Tell us, look, what would you rather have? Someone on the street shooting up, possibly shoplifting, stealing, breaking into homes, causing their families to suffer and wonder every day if they're going to die, or put them on methadone. And she said, to all you people out there in law enforcement, you only see the train wrecks. You don't see the responsible people. For example, a nurse that comes in the morning, gets her methadone, goes back home, gets her kids up, feeds them, puts them on the bus to school, goes to work, feeds them dinner at night, puts them to bed again. She said methadone is scientifically proven to work. But it's not just methadone, it's Suboxone. Suboxone can be abused, but again, you're getting people with medically assisted treatment. And I know there's a fight here between some people say it's treatment, it's not recovery. But, like Dr. Volkoff said, you're going to reduce the mortality rate by 70% with medically assisted treatment. And it is
70%.
70%. And then there's Vivitrol, which is more like a Narcan, which is not it's not a narcotic. And some people prefer that because it's not the narcotic and it's like a 30-day Narcan. We know this. There is no one-size shoe that fits all. So you experiment with the different things. You fight hard on prevention. You do what Jim O'Day and you mentioned the CARE Act did in terms of limiting it to a 7-day supply, which I know the governor even wanted 3 days. But, there were people, with chronic pain who said, you can't do this to us, and they've got a very legitimate beef there. There are people in the drug industry who were lobbying for 14 days. I think over $700 million was spent lobbying legislatures throughout the country.
That's been an issue with farmers since I was doing biotech.
Right.
That's always been an issue, is cost of drugs and access to care. Obviously, not everybody with a mental health disorder is going to be addicted to drugs. Not everybody is going to go for a gun. Not everybody is going to go kill people. It's not, it's as you said, it's not a one-shoe-fits-all scenario. And I think people in the mental health, I believe, my opinion, which I don't usually state, is that with mental health, it's still stigmatized to a bit of, those people that did the shootings and those people that did that, they had mental disorders. So you're like them. How do we know that you can be helped, and should we be scared of that? And again, I think the great thing about this county and the city is I've met so many people of these organizations and city leaders that you're talking about that have all of you have come together to make this a priority. And then going into the schools, it reminds me of DARE back on the day, right? Mm-hmm. Where it was a drug prevention thing, and then now with the proms, and then it was, MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. When I was in high school in the 1980s, in Metro West, they started the first chapter of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And then now you've got at prom time, they're coming out with these car crashes and showing these kids.
And we take drug forfeiture money and give it to the people.
Oh, really? Your drug forfeiture money goes to that?
Yes, after the proms, they go to the schools.
There's a lot of drug forfeiture money, apparently.
Well, we've spent over $1.5 million. And those kids are going to be safe all night. They're released in the morning and there's no alcohol. And Vicky, I didn't mean to cut you off again, but there's one thing you said on that too. We're doing something right now. We're looking at what they're doing in Essex with the detox.
Essex County, which is north of Boston.
Yes, and what they did was they took 100 beds, knocked it down to 42, another 100 for men, another 100 beds, knocked it down to 24 for women, because they find that there are more complications with women in being in jail, different things. And what they do is, this is for the people, families that these people are using, and they don't want them in general population where they might be brutalized. They're withdrawing, they're going through the withdrawals, they're fighting for their lives with alcohol, which detox from alcohol can kill you. But they go into a 28-day program, and we've taken all the legislatures, or will have taken all the legislatures by the end of September, over to see the program being run in Essex. And Essex already signed off on those pilot programs you mentioned They have a 7-year contract.
And I know that Mayor of Gloucester, sorry to interrupt, has been very active. I mean, it's very
Yes.
prevalent among the fishing population and others in that area. And I think when you mentioned Essex County, I think that's a big one. And that brings to the mine recovery high schools, which we have one. And that's a whole nother show in itself. But again, it's to your point of prevention and getting to the kids.
And the sheriff wants that too. But then again, it's going to be a cost of money. And Senator Chandler, has some things she wants to see happen. Representative O'Day does as well. We've got to try and find a way to make this work in Worcester County because we know it works. We know that it's going to help. You start with prevention. You deal with the problem again. All the community partners coming together to work for a solution on a community problem with a community solution.
Okay. So as we wrap up, I have 2 quick questions. One, there's been talk in other areas about designated, because you talked a little bit about being on the street, designated drug user places that they can shoot up where they can safely get rid of their needles. And this is statewide. I've heard this in many communities. This has come up about whether or not this should be there and that there could be a counselor there. What's your thought on that real quickly?
My thought is we only have enough money to put 12% of those with substance use disorder into beds and into treatment. I'd rather see taxpayer money used to increase beds, to increase treatment. I've heard the arguments with regards to the safe injection sites, but personally I believe more beds, more treatment centers, more recovery coaches would be the way to go. That's the way I'd like to see the taxpayer money used.
Okay. Fair enough. So the last question, too, is that you addressed the issue about stigma, which it was very front and center in an article that the Department of Public Health, what's her official, Dr. Castillo's official title? I always think of Department of Public Health, but it's Health and Human Services.
Commissioner of
Health and Human Services for the City of Worcester. Very quoted about this issue of we can do more, which is what you're saying, the same thing. We can do more, we're trying to do more, and we're going to do it. So you have 10 colleagues. There are 11 district attorneys in Massachusetts, which I didn't actually know the number. But by wrapping up, this is off the opioid topic for a minute.
Can I just say one thing on that?
Oh, absolutely.
Stigma's huge. Parents can't be worried about the neighbor finding out if their kid's using. They have to be worried about getting the child help. And look, these aren't the dredges of the earth. These aren't the worst people in the world. These are our sons, our brothers, our sisters, our daughters, our fathers, our mothers who are using. And sometimes they started using because of a prescription. Many times because of a prescription. 80% of the time, whether it was legally or illegally obtained. We've got to fight stigma. These people are our sons, brothers, fathers, daughters, sisters, mothers, aunts, and uncles. All right, I'm sorry, but
no, that's okay. And it's also, like I said, it could be something you don't know. You don't know what's behind that person walking down the street. You have no idea. As you said,
Exactly.
A nurse
came
in and then we had Suboxone treatment and methadone, and then went home and did her job and whatever, and is taking responsibility for that action. And I think that's where you're going with that. So, because we're on limited time, there was one issue off the opioid subject that I wanted to bring up. Suffolk County District Attorney, the Suffolk County includes the city of Boston, has gotten some press recently. Rachel Rollins is the district attorney there. There was a big profile in Boston Magazine because she said she wants to, quote, stop criminalizing poverty, addiction, and mental illness, end cash bail, and send drug users to treatment instead of jail. And I know that they passed a law where women, instead of going to jail for addiction, they are going to a recovery. I forget what community that was in, or if that was statewide. But she then went even further and released a list of 15 specific offenses that she wants to decriminalize, including shoplifting, trespassing to seek shelter, and disturbing the peace. For which she wants the, quote, default policy would not be to prosecute unless there's extenuating circumstances. So in your office, in your county that you're responsible, do you think decriminalizing some of these smaller things to put money towards other things can be done and is a smart way to go?
I respect Rachel Rollins. She ran on that platform, and that was in Suffolk County. What I run on in Worcester County is our diversion programs for shoplifting, possession, getting people treatment, not getting them a prison cell. But, for example, the mom and pop store, if someone goes in and shoplifts, what we'll do is if they agree to go through our diversion program, minor transporting alcohol, we're decriminalizing it in a way that I think is a very responsible way. They give us 8 hours of community service.
They have to go to court, though?
Oh, they go to court, and they have to sign a contract with us. That contract says they'll give us 8 hours of community service. If it's an alcohol or a drug offense, they'll take a 1-hour online test that deals with the drug and alcohol. If they complete the 8 hours of community service, working on fields that kids play on, as I mentioned, between the hours of 3 to 6, which keeps them away from trouble. This kind of dovetails with each other. If they do the 8 hours community service, take the 1 hour online test, I'll dismiss the case prior to arraignment. And out of the first 1,455 people we had come through our diversion program, especially for college students.
1,500 people, roughly?
Yeah, roughly, only 50
And it
were
worked
recidivists.
for-
And I give some of
50
those.
recidivists out of 1,500?
It's only 50, roughly 50, 55 people got rearrested, and I give some of them another chance too, because the parents want to send. We've got 11 colleges, 12 colleges in the Worcester area.
I've heard 9 to 13, but go ahead.
Yeah, they send.
I joke about that.
They send their kids here to get an education, not a criminal record. And
But these aren't just kids we're talking about either.
No,
That's an important point.
It's a very important point. But, we expand the ages on the shoplift and stuff. But at the same time, you got to respect the store owner. You can't have someone go in there with a license to steal under $1,000 worth of stuff and not have a repercussion. That doesn't do anyone's economy any good. And again, my colleague ran on that in Suffolk County, and that's what she told the voters, and that's what they were elected her on. But right here in Worcester County, we have diversion programs, we have prevention programs. We're not criminalizing poverty. What we're trying to do is put the money into the areas where it's needed most to allow kids to make smart, responsible decisions. We've got pilot programs from Fitchburg, Winchendon, Worcester, Leominster, Clinton, Milford. Someone gets arrested, AdCare or Spectrum, call them immediately if it's an overdose, and say, how can we help? And we get them beds. So that's what we're all about in Worcester County. And other people do things different ways. I can't speak for them. I can only speak for myself. I ran on a theme of prevention. I'd rather prevent a crime than have to solve a crime. And we want to do what's best ultimately for the people of Worcester County to keep this community safe. And that involves working with everyone, and that involves dealing with the biggest social problem of our generation right now, and that's the opioid crisis.
Yeah. So again, we covered quite a bit. I know I learned new things, as I said today. I always do. That's why I love doing this show. I hope my listeners learned something as well. So a big thank you to a very busy man, my guest, Worcester County District Attorney Joe Early. Thanks, Joe, for being here.
No, thanks. This was great.
And I can't wait to get the book that you talked about and have you come back. So that's Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Have a wonderful day. Wonderful day. Wonderful day. Wonderful day.